As I said earlier, we wish that we could have all been together in person today. One thing you cannot replace with a virtual meeting is the personal connections we all make when we are together. One way we thought we could try to capture the experience in a small way virtually is in our next session called Living with PMD. We invited a sampling of some of our amazing PMD families to tell us in their own words what it is like living with PMD from their perspective. We asked the following families the same 5 questions to see how each of them described living with PMD from their experience. The first question: when you received the PMD diagnosis, how did you react? Was there already a history of PMD in your family? Was this a novel mutation or a known one? The second question: how has having a child or children with PMD changed your life? The third question: does your child have conatal or classic PMD? The fourth question: give us a brief picture of what a typical day in your household looks like. What kind of support system do you have? And how do you balance career and caregiver obligations? And then the last question: how have you coped with caring for your child and family during the COVID-19 pandemic? Let's see what they had to say.
So when I received the diagnosis, so my wife and I received the diagnosis of PMD for our son Leonardo, we knew at that moment that our life has completely changed. It was not going to be the same life that we were expecting. Uncertainty, definitely doubt and fear creep in. It's rough. Then you realize that through God's grace that you gotta focus and be determined that this is not going to be his life. You gotta start doing your research, start learning more about his disease, understanding how you can make his life not about this, but about living, about being happy, and that takes time. That takes time, but that is something that you have to do. Obviously, reading through Google and doing this and doing all the internet search, it scares you. But as you talk to more families, as you find more groups out there to communicate with, you start realizing that there's hope and there's life, and you start seeing your child with a different set of eyes. You realize that he's not his disease, he's quirky, he's fun, and then he has his own personality. And so you move on from that. There was no history per se of PMD before that. However, my wife's brother Saul was diagnosed with cerebral palsy, with CP. It was not until Saul's death, after Leonardo was born, and we found out about his disease, and my brother-in-law passed away in 2017. It was a week before his death that we finally got confirmation that he was also living with PMD. So even though there was no history per se in terms of known history, there was history within the family, and so a lot of things started making sense, obviously, after that. Well, having a child with PMD definitely changed my life. It's you take nothing for granted. Life priorities change, of course, and my spoken word becomes a miracle. Him saying "mom" clearly or "dad" clearly, it's infinite joy. A successful clap is a riot around the house. You live life for the little moments. You live. You fill out your bucket of life with sands of grain rather than large pebbles, and those are what brings joy to your life. It's like when you grab sand, there might be crabs and insects in there. It might bite you, and you might feel pain. But then you learn about seeing him and watching him go through this, and the smiles that he has, and then they change you. Living for others, having him and me having to live for him and not for me. it saves you. I don't know how else to explain it. It saves you. It brings some other joys that you didn't experience before. What's a typical day in my house? Inside my house, before the pandemic, obviously it's typical as with any family. For him, we wake him up. You have to exercise him, stretch him. You have to carry him. I mean, he's 7 years old now. You have to carry him to the kitchen. You have to feed him. Obviously, there's diaper change that's ongoing. But you take him to school as other child, leave him there with a paraprofessional, and you go about your day. Then throughout the days and your weeks, it's a lot about going to occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech. My wife, it's amazing at keeping our sons healthy throughout all of that. So you find ways to make that part of your day a normal. That becomes your normal day. I found that having a partner in your life to be there when you can't breathe, when you feel like you're in a diving bell, in a pressure cooker, or I call it my traro, to go there and grab you by the hand and lift you. It's okay. We're gonna get through this together. Those really makes a big difference on the day to day on living through this disease with as a family. The pandemic itself, now that I try not to think too much about it. It is definitely concerning. Our children with PMD are considered, or are part of the high risk people for this condition. So we try to stay safe. We are quarantined. We try not to interact with people other than very close family that we know that are quarantining themselves. There is stress and apprehension of what could happen, but we're trying to be very diligent about it. I'm lucky and I'm blessed that I have a job that allows me to work from home, and so we find other ways to entertain our children and Leo. We got to buy Monopoly games now, and we play with them. We get Leo to do some other work. He misses school, he misses his friends, but we know that some way, somehow we'll get through this, and we'll move on, and things will hopefully go back to not necessarily the way it was. There'll be more appreciation for life, but go back to a way of life that's still meaningful, that's still comforting and for all of us and for a child. I think that's what I have to say.
When I received the PMD diagnosis, Jacob was 10 months old. It had been a long time, well, it felt like it was a long time in coming, because we knew from the second he was born that there was something wrong. When we actually got the official diagnosis, it was almost like a relief, because we now knew what was wrong, and it's like, okay, closing the chapter of a book, we know what it is, now open the next chapter, and let's try to figure out how we could help him and make him better, or make him happier, make him more comfortable. At the time when we received the diagnosis, there was no known history in my family, but it was part of, in the investigation of trying to figure out what was wrong with Jacob, we uncovered that there was indeed a family history. Not only that, there was an article that was published in a journal called Clinical Genetics in 1973 that described my family. and that was written without my family's consent and without my family knowing about the article or the theory that there was a family, an X-linked family disorder in my mom's family. So once we ended up getting my son tested and was able to go back in the history, the mutation was a new mutation that was unique to our family. If someone asked me, having a child with PMD, how has it changed my life? I don't really know how to answer that because Jacob was my first child. So having a child changed my life, and having a child with PMD obviously changed it. I guess the biggest difference is that when I was pregnant, I was expecting to have a 3-month maternity leave. I worked in the investment industry, and I planned to go back to work as soon as I could. In Ontario, where I live, the maternity leave is a year, but I was only planning on taking 3 months. Jacob is now 18 years old and I haven't been able to go back to work. Jacob has the most serious or most severe type of PMD. He's got conatal PMD. A typical day in my house revolves around Jacob and around his care. He needs 24-hour nursing care, and most times he needs 2 people with him because his size, he's almost 100 pounds, but because he's got such severe breathing issues and scoliosis, moving him is very difficult. He has no independent movement. He's got no head support. So even by turning him, we need somebody at the top and somebody at the bottom. If we need to lift him, we need somebody at the top, somebody at the bottom. It takes about an hour and a half to get him ready to get out of bed in the morning. He has BiPAP overnight, and he needs frequent suctioning. We can't put him in his chair in the morning until his lungs are cleared. Otherwise, he will choke and desat. During the day, there are many times where we have to suction him. We sometimes have to give him oxygen. We have to watch him really closely because things can turn so quickly. I mean, the thing we say the most about Jacob is that the most predictable thing about him is how unpredictable he really is. During the pandemic, when it first started, I wasn't overly worried. I thought, okay, great, now people can see what we normally live with because we live in fear of a cold. You know, if Jacob gets a cold, he could end up being on BiPAP and has ended up being on BiPAP for 3 weeks straight and not being able to get out of bed. So I thought, okay, so now people are going to be concerned about getting a virus. That's what we live with all the time. But as things went on and we got to learn more and more about how potentially deadly this virus can be and how much of a risk people like Jacob are, it's become very scary, and we have not really done anything since the lockdown began at the beginning of March. So there's, we can't go to any restaurants, we can't get onto a bus, we can't go into a coffee shop. Even as things slowly open up in Toronto, just because we can do it, it doesn't mean that it's safe for Jacob. And that's basically how we're living now.
Hi, I'm Paul Arena. I've been asked to speak a little bit about our family's experience with first off, the way that we reacted when we first got the PMD diagnosis, because this was 29 years ago, there was not a great deal known about Pelizaeus-Merzbacher disease at the time. It took a lot of testing to kind of pin it down. So James was about 2.5 by the time we had that pinned down. And at that point, we were just glad to know what we were dealing with. We basically talked to a number of doctors, a couple of different hospitals, extensive testing, and it was at that point just good to know what James was dealing with and what we were dealing with him. So that was kind of our reaction. There was not at the time a known history of PMD in the family, but on further explanation and exploration, we kind of figured out that it did exist in my wife's family. She had had 2 older brothers who had passed away from what was probably PMD and was misdiagnosed as CP back in the 1950s. As far as I know, this is a known mutation. It's actually a duplication. And it is presenting itself as the classical form of Pelizaeus-Merzbacher disease, not the connatal form. Okay, so having a kid with Pelizaeus-Merzbacher disease certainly changes your life. I feel like it has become our life because we've kind of grown into getting used to dealing with a child with Pelizaeus-Merzbacher disease, from a really early stage. It's just become the focus of pretty much everything that I do. My whole day is built around that, and that's pretty much where we go every day. James has the classic version of PMD. As I mentioned earlier, it's duplication. The doctors have a pretty good sense of where that is and what it looks like. And he has fairly severe symptoms of classical PMD. So a brief picture of what a typical day around here looks like. It's pretty much getting him up in the morning, getting him going, getting him ready for his caregivers to show up. They run his day for me, making sure that he gets his feeds on time, that he's got some entertainment, he has some things that he can engage in. I get home, we do a little standard time, little time before dinner, get his feed on time. I make dinner for the rest of the family, hang out in the evenings, give him a shower, get him into bed, set up his nighttime drip, and then the whole thing kind of starts over again. Support system, again, it's caregivers from a couple of different agencies. They are really critical to how things run around here. They're people I've trained. They do a nice job and really essential people. Balancing career, I've had to give up some career opportunities. I now work locally, which is fine. It gives me the chance to be a few minutes from home. If I need to respond to something at home, for James, I can do it. And that works out much better for me. It works out better for James. In terms of coping with caring for him during COVID-19, as a school employee, I got sent home in March. So I was here, I was doing all of my work remotely, which was fine. We were able to deal with the loss of afternoon care time. That agency stopped providing the people as soon as the pandemic kind of hit Vermont in a big way. So I've been filling in that afternoon time for him, and it has worked because it's had to work. So you just do what you got to do.
Now that we've heard from some of our amazing families, we would like to invite you to share what it is like for you living with PMD with a live polling exercise. This will give us an example of how this data can be useful to our research community. Please follow the instructions on the screen.